Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome. I want to thank everyone at Writers House for putting this event together on short notice. Really appreciate it. I'm going to introduce Sebastian and then turn it over. Sebastian Modak is a travel writer and multimedia journalist in New York City. In 2019, he was selected to be the New York Times 52 Places Traveler and spent the year traveling to and reporting from all the destinations on the Times 52 Places to Go list. Prior to that, Modak was part of the digital team at Condé Nast Traveler for 3 years, where he was editor and then a staff writer. He also has worked as a producer on the MTV World series Rebel Music. As a 2013 Fulbright-mtvU Fellow, he spent a year documenting the hip-hop scene in Gaborone, Botswana. Of mixed Colombian and Indian heritage, Modak has lived in 6 countries on 4 continents. In 2010, he received a BA from the University of Pennsylvania, where he majored in English and history and minored in music and African studies. Okay, that's the official bio. Sebastian, I'm very proud to be able to say, is also my former student, a member of the first class I taught at Penn. I recently went back and looked up the first email that Sebastian sent me. It was sent on September 10th, 2007. At the time, Penn's registration system didn't include student photos, or maybe I didn't know how to find them. And so I asked my students to send me their pictures so I'd be able to learn their names. Actually strikes me as a little weird now that I think of it, but that's what I did. Anyways, Sebastian sent me this photo. With a note, it says, "It's really the most decent I could find, and it's still utterly ridiculous." I took that as a very good sign. I was very impressed. And in the same email, Sebastian attached the first page of a story he was working on. The title, in quotation marks atop the page, was "Untitled for Now." Sorry, no, this is not supposed to be a roast, but I can't resist. The story was about a man named Kenny who is walking down the street when he's approached by a panhandler, who Sebastian described as a middle-aged man in a faded blue sweater and frayed sweatpants holding out a shaky hand. The soot of the factories, Sebastian continued, had layered his weathered fingers. As much as I'd like to take credit for Sebastian's success, as you can see, he could already write by the time he made it to my class. Kenny's advice to the homeless man, entirely unsolicited, is to rely on his imagination to escape reality, to picture himself in different places across the world at different times, just as a child might. Do you remember this, Bud? The advice works, and the man sends Kenny a letter recounting his extraordinary journeys. At the time of the writing, the man had just returned from a mental trip to Europe. As you can see, it was no accident that Sebastian Modak ended up as the 52 Places Traveler. Sebastian, I suspect, had already taken quite a few mental trips across the globe before his actual trip. It's also no accident that the Times selected Sebastian among what must have been an extraordinary number of applicants. Sebastian, like all of the best travel writers, has a remarkable eye for detail, for capturing the unique sights and sounds of a new destination. But what makes his work truly exceptional is his eye for humanity. At every stop on his incredible journey, he introduces us to fascinating characters who, no matter how different they might be from one another, seem to share an innate kindness. There's much to be depressed about today, but after reading through Sebastian's accounts of his journeys, it's hard not to feel optimistic. I think I now understand why Kenny told that panhandler that he met to go on a mental journey. Seen through Sebastian Modak's eyes, the world is a truly wonderful place. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sebastian Modak.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you so much. And please send me that story, because I have zero recollection of writing it. So yeah, I figured just to start off, give you a little overview of the last year of my life, which was to travel to all 52 places on the New York Times 52 Places to Go list and report from all of them. So just as a quick overview, I'm going to give you some numbers just to get an idea of the pace of this trip, and then show a quick video too, if you don't mind. So, clicker's not working. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, over the course of the 11 months that I was reporting, I went to 36 countries, took 88 flights, flew through 79 airports on 40 different airlines, some of them good, some of them not so great. So all in all, I traveled 119,772 miles by air, which is the equivalent of close to 5 times around the Earth. And I spent 12 full days of 2019 in the air. Stayed in 78 hotels, 21 Airbnbs or Airbnb equivalents, rented 21 cars and drove the equivalent of, I think it's 3 or 4 times across the United States. So all in all, oh, sorry, there's more. I only missed 1 flight, which I'm pretty proud of, and I only lost 2 items, a pair of sunglasses in Senegal and a bathing suit in Panama, which I'm also pretty proud of. I spent 11 hours underwater, and in all I got on 48 boats and 45 trains. So that's one way of looking at my trip. That was the journey I took over the course of 2019. That's every flight I took in order, though it's probably hard to tell where it begins and where it ends. It started in New York and it ended in Calgary. And but I actually prefer, if you want to go to the next slide, yeah, I prefer this map. This is what my Google Maps looks like. And each of those hearts is a saved favorite on Google Maps because it was, and there's close to, it's hard to tell from this zoomed out perspective, but there's close to 500 of them. And each one is a restaurant, a bar, a street corner, a neighborhood, a museum, a hotel, something that I fell in love with over the course of my trip. Because it was intense, the pace was intense, but what I remember mostly are what these hearts represent. And to show that, to show both the pace of it and the moments that stuck with me, I'm just going to show a quick video, if you want to go to the video.
Hey everyone, I'm in Panama, Dakar, Las Vegas, New York City, Tunis, Norway, Chongli, Dessau, Germany, and where the am I?
Hey, it's Sebastian Modak. I just finished traveling to all the spots on the 52 places to go list for the New York Times.
Another day, another airport hotel.
Here's where I went and some of the things I did.
Here goes nothing.
So it's a piece of bread that was put under a giant thing of meat, and then they put pork inside it too.
Pork inside. Beautiful.
And that's served with cold beer, right?
Of course.
Did I mention it's 10:30 a.m.? Back there, I don't know if you can see him, is Kimeon. He's going to show me where to have lunch. He claims he knows a place where they give you a whole fish for $5.
Houston is famously the most diverse city in the U.S., so I kind of just hopped around from community to community and ate everything I could.
Hey, where are we? Flower Bay Lake Spear.
So we're here in the Pinball Hall of Fame. Hundreds and hundreds of pinball machines. I'm getting a little sneak preview of the remodeling that's going on in the Wyoming State Capitol building.
Oh wow.
No, I'm good. I mean, yes, but I'm good. I'm at the Book Loft in German Village in Columbus, Ohio. Advertises itself as having 32 rooms of books. Officially lost, but I don't mind. I'm here at the Space and Rocket Center. I'm on the moon. Let's go meet some archaeologists. They're taking the air out of the tires right now because we're heading into the desert to check out a Richard Serra sculpture. So I'm here at the Central Asian Plov Center where they just make kind of national dish plov, which is kind of like a rice pilaf thing. Cheers. It's real good. So we're here at the Batumi Fish Market. You can buy it fresh here, and then next door they grill it up for you. Hiking all day through the Amun crater. So it's Orthodox Easter today. It's midnight, and I was just going to bed and I heard these bells, so I had to come out, see what's up. Even though I really want to go to sleep. I think for Google Maps, or I'd get hopelessly lost in these mountains and never make it out. So I've made it to Aalborg
Denmark. Going to meet up with a friend of a friend, staying in like the most adorable Airbnb ever. It comes with an adorable cat too. Made it to Stavanger. Feels good after a very long drive, very nice drive. I'm gonna head to the fish market, get something to eat, and I'll meet my writing deadline when I'm dead. This is idyllic, spooky vibes on my way to the hotel. Walking through a graveyard.
Fried cheese, what's not there to like?
Walking to the beach. It's extremely hot. Looking forward to getting into that ocean. Here we go. The sun is gonna perform a little magic trick. What an opportunity to be watching the total solar eclipse from a famous astronomical observatory. I'm out here in the Falkland Islands, Volunteer Point, surrounded by a colony of king penguins. Yeah, I'd say that little adventure paid off. So I'm checking out this mill. Dates back to 1500. It's the last one in the area that's still going. Churches on churches on churches on churches. Here in Lecce, in Puglia, in Italy. Baroque and roll. You know what I mean? I've been walking by this beach right in the center of town for 2 days now. But now it's finally time to go to it. I'm out here in Biscoitos. And we have these natural swimming pools that form from the ocean. It's gonna be a little cold. Last day in Munich, sun's shining. I'm in another city. Can't complain. Sure, I'm a little out of shape. It's all that eating I've been doing in Europe. It's just so quiet, there's nobody around. So it was pretty tough getting out of bed this morning. But I'm glad I did get out of bed. Because what a beautiful day in Lyon. So I'm here in Marseille, which is a city I've fallen in love with pretty quickly. I could live here if I spoke a word of French. So I'm in these Roman thermal baths in Carthage. Honestly, I could use a bath right now. This amazing pup behind me has been following me for the last hour. Just on the adventure with me. I think I'm obsessed. I love you. I love you. I feel like I'm on the set of a zombie film. Ski zombies. Even if I didn't like art, this would be so much fun. It's like a scavenger hunt. I'm in Hong Kong. It's Halloween. And this is what's happening. Alright, so I'm here in the Hampi, in the state of Karnataka, in India, and it's just totally crazy. It's so many temples and palaces and ruins of this 14th century, 15th century civilization that I had, shows my ignorance. I had no idea even existed. I'm in Da Nang. Rather than stay inside and write, which I need to do, I rented a motorbike. I really can't believe this year's almost over. I'm trying to savor every last moment of it. 10 months in and I still can't believe this is my job. Get this giant tree growing out of a giant slab of rock. Monrangiroa, which is a world-famous scuba diving spot, said to have one of the largest concentrations of sharks in the world. I'm not scared. You're scared. Here in Whiteman Airport, about to get into that thing. So I'm at the old Franciscan mission in Santa Barbara. Just came across a very good tree. So this is the reason Calgary made the list. This beautiful new public library. Okay. And just like that, I'm back home. What a whirlwind of a year. Thanks for following along, and hopefully see you around. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what the year was like in terms of pace, but also some of the moments that really stuck with me. I also like watching that because I think you can see me get progressively more and more disheveled as the year goes on, and progressively more and more comfortable with talking to myself, which I did a lot of, as you can imagine, when you're traveling alone for a year. But it wasn't all just fun, as you can see. I mean, I was also filing an article every week and photos and everything else. So now, should I do the reading now? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to read one article that I put out last year.
I wrote it in, I want to say Georgia, but it's about Uzbekistan. Came out in April, this was my 11th stop of the trip. All right. So it's called In Uzbekistan, Encounters with a Dead Goat, but in a good way. I'm in the back of a rusty trailer attached to a Soviet-era tractor with 6 Uzbek men and a dead goat. The air smells of horses and sweat, and when my teeth hit each other, I can feel the crunch of fine dust in my mouth. The tractor moves into the middle of an empty field, a snow-capped mountain range dominating the horizon. We're being pursued by a horde of men on horseback packed into a scrum so dense it's hard to tell which man is riding which horse. Then, 2 men in the trailer lift the goat carcass, made heavier by the salt it's stuffed with, and drop it into the dust. The shouts of the horsemen get louder, and it's a frenzy. With stiff riding crops in hand, they whip their horses, each other's horses, and each other. This is kopkari, also known as buzkashi, a sport originating at least 1,000 years ago with the nomadic Turkic groups who inhabited the Central Asian steppes. Versions of the game vary slightly from country to country, but here in Uzbekistan, the rules are few and straightforward. The 200 riders compete to pick up the stuffed goat carcass, bending down from their horses, and bring it to a target, a circle of hay placed in front of the announcer's box. Each round has a pot of winnings to which spectators contribute. Sometimes money, oftentimes a hand-woven carpet, or even a horse. I was brought to the event by a guide-turned-friend, Khurshid Narimov, head of Turbine, a tourism company, who drove me from the city of Samarkand promising, quote, something special. The highway into the district of Bulungur gave way to dirt after about an hour, and coming up a hill, I caught my first sight of the festivities. Thousands of men sitting on the hillside looking down onto the field. A comparatively small number of women were watching from a section on the other side of the natural amphitheater. You're one of very few travelers to have a chance to enjoy this beauty, Mr. Narimov told me as we made our way to the field. You will be the only foreigner among thousands who will be there. And that I was. I didn't go unnoticed. My presence was quickly announced over the loudspeaker, and at one point I was given the microphone. Instead of discomfort in the spotlight, I felt an overwhelming sense of welcome. People smiled and waved, encouraging me to get closer to the action. At least 15 people approached me throughout the day to tell me that their cousin, their sister, or another relative lived in New York City. Actually, Brooklyn. They'd show me their phone number with the area code +1. At first I thought it was proof, but I quickly realized they wanted me to jot down the number to call once I got home. One young man, despite not speaking a word of English, devoted his day to looking out for me, more than once pulling me by the shirt collar in the split second before the herd of horses changed directions and came barreling towards where we stood. But then, all of Uzbekistan had been like that. In Tashkent, the country's capital, an Uzbek man living in South Korea had messaged me on Instagram with a recommendation for dinner. He recorded a voice message with directions to Cafe Bukhara in the northern area of the city so that I could play it for a taxi driver, and he gave me a list of exactly what to order. The staff, taken aback by my presence, laughed in delight as I dug into a plate of kebabs known as shashlik, perfectly crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside, and samsa, a cousin to the samosa, filled with meat and baked in a tandoor. Traveling through Uzbekistan and encountering practices like kopkari can give Western travelers that sense of disorientation and novelty that drives so many of us to leave home in the first place. It's not just because the country was long closed off to many travelers, first as part of the Soviet Union, and then under a dictator who died in 2016. For many, the country's geographical position and subsequent history as the center of the Silk Road has cloaked it in something mythical. My own introduction to that history came as a child, hunched over the glowing screen of my computer for hours at a time, playing the 1996 strategy nerdfest Civilization II. Finally seeing the famed cities of Samarkand and Bukhara so richly elaborated in my own imagination was like walking through a dream. I wandered the narrow lanes from mausoleum to madrasa, mosque to palace complex with wide-eyed astonishment. Seeing the Registan of Samarkand for the first time, a town square boxed in by 3 towering madrasas blanketed in turquoise tiles, I imagined the past, when those blue domes filled the horizon and polyglot crowds, Jewish merchants, Persian Zoroastrians, Muslim students of astronomy gathered in the Registan to watch public proclamations and executions. Within Uzbekistan, there's been a recent push to reclaim the country's history after years of suppression under Soviet ideology. In some ways, the facts of that history, that the Silk Road wasn't the single China to Rome route many assumed it to be, but rather an interconnected trading network more resembling a cracked windshield than a straight line, that Timur, known in English as Tamerlane, who once ruled an empire out of Samarkand, was as much a butcher as a tactical genius, matter less to people here than the pride of having it to tell. Traveling from Tashkent to Samarkand to Bukhara, and I do recommend that order, my feeling of amazement only intensified. In Bukhara, I found even older vestiges of the past. The Samanid Mausoleum, a structure made of intricately carved brick, dates back more than 1,000 years. It was only spared by Genghis Khan and his army of Mongol horsemen, infamous for flattening entire cities, because it had been inundated in mud from floods. Elsewhere in the city, the Kalyan Minaret, part of a mosque complex that is covered with Uzbekistan's signature green and blue mosaics, was also spared by the Mongols. Legend has it, and the history of this region is buried under many layers of legend, that it was so tall that when Genghis Khan looked up at it, his helmet fell off. Bending down to pick it up, his troops thought he was genuflecting at the holy structure, and so it was spared as the rest of the city was burned to the ground. Whatever the facts, this land was a precursor to globalization as we know it today, a place where multiple currencies, languages, and religious traditions were exchanged freely. You can trace this history in people's faces. The shape of a woman's eye might suggest a distant Mongolian ancestor, but her irises could match the light blue Arabic script that snakes up and around the towers of Timur's burial place in Samarkand. The next passerby wouldn't be out of place in Tehran. To build an identity out of a melting pot takes endurance. There are tourists who might bemoan the many souvenir shops that occupy every available nook and cranny of Bukhara and Samarkand's historical sites. But these aren't all the assembly line junk that fills tourist centers the world over. Outside the front door of his shop, a carpenter works on his next creation, a handmade rehal, the X-shaped cradle used to hold the Quran. In the unassuming town of Gijduvan, about an hour's drive outside of Bukhara, the Narzulayev family, currently in its 7th generation of potters, creates bowls, plates, and tiny ceramic sculptures the old way. The potter's wheel is spun by the sandaled foot of the potter, and the temperature of the kiln is determined by sight. In Konigil, on the outskirts of Samarkand, Zarif Mukratov has built a mill from scratch, where he is keeping the tradition of silk paper, made from the branches of the mulberry tree, alive. Many people who come here think it's just for tourists, Mr. Murkatov told me, in the idyllic cottage that doubles as a showroom and office. I'm sorry, but it's not. I was doing this at home for years before any tourists came. When I ask what will happen when he and his wife are gone, he's unequivocal. My ancestors left this knowledge for me, and I'll be leaving this for the next generation. In Bukhara, Davlat Toshev, a world-renowned miniature painter, invited me from his workshop into his home. He's currently teaching 2 of his daughters how to paint the detail-filled tableau of history and legend that the region is famous for, and is hoping to build a whole school for the art form. I asked him how he made sure the technique, which requires squinting at parchment, often through a magnifying glass, could be maintained. No television, he said. Uzbekistan was on the 52 places list for 2019 because of its renewed openness after years of isolation. I think the kindness and enthusiasm I found are tied to where the country finds itself. English isn't widely spoken, but everyone who knew even a few passing words was eager to practice, as if they sensed they'd be using them more in the years to come. Painting Uzbekistan as exotic is all too easy a trap. This is history lived in. Most of the attractions I visited are holy places for Muslims and were packed with far more pilgrims from across the country than Instagramming foreigners. In the shadow of Bukhara's Kalyan Mosque, a group of children, fresh out of school, played a game of pickup soccer, shouting nicknames at each other, Messi, Suarez, Ronaldo, as they used the centuries-old stone wall as a bouncing board. The rush of the now in Uzbekistan is as strong as anywhere else, even as it tangles with history. Tashkent is a modern, strikingly clean and green capital with a metro system that doubles as an art gallery, each station more beautiful than the last. Its heart, though, is Amir Timur Square, featuring a statue of the ruler, and just behind it, the big block of concrete that is the Soviet-era Hotel Uzbekistan. On the Kopkari pitch, about 2 hours into the game, Mr. Narimov suggested that, as a special guest, I should contribute something significant to the winnings pot. My handing over a $100 bill elicited applause from the thousands of attendees. I shook hands with the winner and offered him my bottle of water. In between shallow, exhausted breaths, he drained the bottle and then climbed from his sweat-covered horse directly onto a fresh mount. Then he turned and galloped back into the fray. Thank you. Let's chat. And if you want to just like play those photos in the background.
Okay, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. It's really extra special for me to see all my current and past students here for this event. I've introduced a number of speakers at Writers House over the years, but I think this is the first time I've been able to host a former student, so it's a really special afternoon for me. I feel like I could ask you questions about this all day, maybe all week, but I'm sure a lot of you have questions, so I won't hog all the time, but you probably had to answer this a lot of times, but I got to know just sort of the first reaction to finding out you got this, because, you know, in my mind, it's
yeah,
better than winning the lottery.
Well, it's also a sign of perseverance, I think, because this was the second time I applied for it. It's the second time the Times did it, and I applied the first year as well, and made it to the final round. And then sometime like right before Christmas, I got an email from the assistant managing editor at the Times saying, "Do you have a second to talk?" And I was like, I got it. I got the job. And she called me and said I did not get the job. And then this time around, last December, or December before that, I swear this email was worded the exact same way. It said, "Hey, do you have a second to talk?" And I was like, here we go again. Really? Just tell me I didn't get the job. And then this time she called and she was like, I was at a holiday party, my girlfriend's holiday party, and I was outside. And she was like, I just wanted to let you know that we'd like to offer you this position. And then everything after that's kind of a blur, because it was a lot to take in. Because they told me in December and I left in mid-January. So I had 2 weeks to pack up and hit the road. So there wasn't a lot of time to let it sink in. I also had to keep it secret for about 2 weeks because they only announced it right before I left. So yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot to take in.
Yeah. But, like, in that very moment, was there like an F yeah, some air guitar, anything?
I think I like stuttered on the phone, and then I said, "Can we talk about this tomorrow? Because I can't put together a sentence right now."
Okay.
And and then I had to turn around and go tell my partner, right, which is a whole other conversation. But it was a lot.
Okay. And I read online that the Times sort of helped you plan the itinerary. I'm just wondering if you could sort of tell us.
Yeah, so they had like mapped out the route beforehand. They did it with the help of Kayak, the booking website, to try to figure out which flights made the most sense and to not have me crisscross the world too much. But I ended up having to do that anyway because there was, I'd be in Europe, but I had to be in Chile for a solar eclipse and like things like that where I had to crisscross the world a few times. But yeah, so they mapped it out. We changed a few things as we went. We never really booked anything until a week or two before I was going to be in the place, because if one thing went wrong, and there were many things that went wrong, it would just be this huge domino effect, right? So we kind of booked on the go. And I had some logistical help back in New York, but I did actually have to do a lot of it myself too.
And you just mentioned that you had only a few weeks before it started, and yet what struck me about the piece you read is that you were able to weave in a lot of history and background. Did you do like crash course reading?
Yeah, a bit. Uzbekistan was unique because I spent almost 2 weeks there, which was the longest I spent anywhere, and I still don't know why. I think it was like a glitch in the way we booked things, and no one noticed, and I was okay with it because there was a lot to see, obviously. But yeah, it was a crash course. It was talking to as many people as possible. I didn't really have time to do a lot of research besides on the plane over to each place, which I think was a benefit in the end in terms of journalism, because I just went in with a wide open mind and also fully admitting and embracing my own ignorance, right? So I was just the one asking the stupid questions and starting from scratch in each place. And I think that really helped me in the end. So I would try to, usually when I was doing the writing, I would start doing the reading to figure out gaps in my knowledge. But otherwise, it was mostly just talking to people. and then fact checking, obviously.
One thing that I was wondering about as you showed the video and, suddenly in the middle of all this, you'd be back in the United States and then out again. I was wondering if it changed your perception of the United States as much as other countries or...
Yeah, I mean, I think it really shattered any self-centeredness that I might have had as being American, right? Our headlines are full of what's happening politically and everything else, and you think the rest of the world is thinking the same things and talking about the same things. But I think what I found most interesting was going to some of these places and I was in Tunisia a week before their elections, and they were obviously talking about the Tunisian elections, and that was refreshing to me to learn about that instead of, because the elephant in the room, and just choose the words wisely, is that everyone asks me are people asking you about Trump, right? Is a question I got a lot, and the answer is no, not really. People have their own concerns. People are worried about what's happening in their countries as well, and I leaned into that and found that I learned a lot more that way about the place that I was in, versus just bringing an American lens to everything, right?
Mm-hmm. And I said in my introduction that I read your pieces and really have this wonderful sense that you're open to other people and that there's kind of an optimistic vision, but I wonder if that felt that way to you as you were going through it.
It did. I mean, when people ask me what's the biggest thing you learned, it really is that way more people in the world are good than are bad. The amount of times I put my life into the hands of complete strangers, and by the end of the experience, they were friends. I still get messages every day from people in Uzbekistan, in Japan, in all these places, in Denmark, just checking in, saying, how you doing, what's up? And it wasn't because I was a New York Times journalist. Oftentimes I wouldn't introduce myself as a New York Times journalist at first. I was just a solo traveler who looked really lost and was looking to meet some people, and people went out of their way. I mean, an example that comes to mind is Denmark, where I met this woman who just recently messaged me to invite me to her 50th birthday in Aalborg, Denmark. I'm not sure I'll make it, but I met her by chance, and we had a really nice conversation. I was like, yeah, I'm just a solo traveler. I'm up here in Aalborg, hanging out for a week, and we talked for a little bit, and by the end of our conversation, she had called into work and taken the next 4 days off work just to show me around her town. Because she was just so psyched that I was there at all and I was interested in learning about it. And that happened again and again and again. So I think, of course, there were mishaps, there were moments throughout the trip that were tough, but overall, the biggest takeaway was that, despite what we read and despite what's out there right now, still more people, if you're on the ground level, are good and are going to help you than are going to harm you.
And as the trip wore on, you mentioned that you were sort of getting a little scruffier and talking to yourself. One thing that struck me is that you're meeting all these incredible people, and yet you're moving on from week to week, that there's a loneliness to it. I actually thought of the legend of the Wandering Jew. This character is cursed by having to keep moving from place to place. So I can see the difficulty of it, too. I'm just wondering how that went.
Yeah, I mean, that was what... Honestly, it was when I got the job, obviously I was stoked beyond belief, but when I was thinking about what I was worried about, I knew the deadlines would be tough. I know the scope of work would be tough. I knew it would be the most exhausting year of my life, and it was, because beyond just filing 2,500 words a week, it was also photos and social media and video, and so it was just, I was always working. I didn't have a day off for 365 days. But that stuff didn't really worry me. I knew I'd get caught up in it. I knew the work, if I have work in front of me, I'm going to do it. I was worried about the loneliness part of it. I'm a fairly extroverted person. I think at least I get energy I recharge by hanging out with friends and things like that. So I was worried about that part. And there were moments where it was tough. I remember driving in Wyoming in the middle of winter, and a John Prine song came on the radio, and I just pulled over, and I was just weeping in the car alone, listening to John Prine. Or, I spent Valentine's Day at a burlesque show in Vegas alone.
It's about as dark as it gets.
So it's pretty dark. So there were definitely some dark moments. But one, I learned to kind of treat it as it's another emotion. It's what makes us human. So I kind of learned to lean into it. I could see when that was coming, and I'd be like, okay, here it comes. I'm going to be sad for a little bit. But it's important to know what this feels like, because then, I'd be hanging out with this. I'd be at this woman in Denmark will have invited me to her family home, and I'm having dinner with this. I'm being treated like family by these people I just met. And I wouldn't know the bliss of that if I hadn't felt the loneliness on the other side of that. So it was important to me to feel that so that I could feel the jubilation that I'd have when I would meet these people who would just open their world to me. And also I got comfortable with solitude in a way too. And I think there is a difference between the word loneliness and the word solitude. And I learned to kind of welcome both, honestly. And especially in places where it was just me and the natural world, like in Norway or in New Zealand, and these places that were just so stunning. I almost liked that I was alone, because I'd be watching this incredible sunset in Norway over a fjord, and there's not a single other person around, and I'm like, this is just mine. This memory is just mine, and it's always going to be mine. And that was kind of nice too, to get comfortable with that. So it was definitely a learning process, and even towards the end, there were moments of loneliness. I didn't learn to not be lonely. It happened. But it's amazing how quickly it could turn as well, right? Like I'm in Batumi, Georgia, and it's pouring rain, and I'm staying in this like soulless Hilton or something. And I'm just like, this sucks. Like, I've got 5 more days here. What am I going to do? And then I meet someone who's like, hey, let's go into the mountains. And I'm like, I spend 2 days in the mountains with like this 70-year-old man and his nephew. It's great, and it's like amazing how quickly those experiences turn if you're open to them.
Yeah, wow. And I'm wondering, we talked a little bit about it already, but I'm just curious about how you've managed to readjust or not manage, as the case. I mean, it must be such a difficult transition back to normal life.
I think not managed is the answer. I'm still working on it. I've been back for 2 months. The first month, and like I said, I didn't have a day off for a year, so I was very intent on giving myself at least a month off when I got back. So, I got some freelance offers and stuff, and I was just like, email me in March. Like, I'm not doing anything for a month. But it was hard. It's hard to not do anything after you're doing so much for so long. So it's been an adjustment. I'm not sure I figured it out. I still wake up some mornings and I'm like, wait, where am I? Like, what, did I miss my flight? Because it was at a certain point, it was just so intense that it kind of became autopilot, right? To just be constantly in this state of perpetual motion. It's like, the way I describe it, it's like you're driving 100 miles an hour, and then the person in the passenger seat pulls the emergency brake, right? It's like not even in my control. It's just like one day, I got off the plane from Calgary back in New York, and it was like, cool, that's it, I went to the New York Times and I was like, here's my laptop and my badge, and that was it. So it was very sudden, and I think I'm getting used to it. But I'm taking my time. I think I recognize that it's going to be a gradual adjustment period, so I'm taking my time with it.
All right, I want to open it up to questions from all of you. I think there's a microphone coming around.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Eliana. I'm an English major. I'm a junior. Something that I always struggle with when I'm traveling is like the balance between like planning out my days in advance and like being spontaneous. Mm-hmm. How did you balance that? Especially like if you like had to write something, like would you try and be more spontaneous, or would you like plan out your sites that you're going to see in advance? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think I changed throughout the year. I think for the first few stops, I like had the pressure of like, these are my first stories for this project, and I want to make sure I'm prepared. So I think I came in over prepared, and I said, okay, the first day I'm going to do this. The second day I'm going to rent a car and drive out here and check out this place. And by the end of it, sometimes I barely knew where I was going to stay when I got on the plane. So it changed throughout. And I think what I learned is that the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, right? It's finding the balance between, okay, I know I want to do these few things, but I'm not going to plan them down to the hour and to the day, and I'm going to leave plenty of space for serendipity, because, the Uzbekistan piece, that whole lead came out of just being open to things. I had a day planned in my head where I was like, okay, I'm in Samarkand tomorrow I'm going to do sightseeing. I'm going to go from mosque to madrasa to palace and check them all out. And then this guy I met was like, hey, I'll take you to something special tomorrow morning. And if I had been like, no, I need to stick to my plan, I've only got a few days here, I would never have had that experience. So I think it's really about being open to serendipity. I know it's hard. I mean, for me, it was different because, you know, it was work. It was a journalist. I was trying to find these stories that I wouldn't find if I just went by other people's itinerary on the internet. It's different if you're going on vacation and you're spending your own valuable money and your own valuable vacation days and you don't want to waste time. But I think even in that situation, it's important to leave enough space for serendipity. And like part of my routine in each place was, well, the first day I got to a place, usually I wouldn't even leave the hotel room because I'd be writing about the last place. But then the first thing I'd do in any place that I was in is I'd just go for a walk, like 2 hours, 3 hours with no destination in mind. Oftentimes I'd leave my phone in my pocket the whole time. I'd leave the camera in the hotel room and I'd just be like, I just want to get my bearings, get a vibe for the place. And oftentimes that would lead to me meeting someone at a cafe or stumbling upon some like art gallery that I would never have found if I had looked for top things to do in, you know, fill in the blank. So yeah, I think it's about finding a balance.
Hey, Sebastian. In a lot of your other writing, you meditate a lot on the question of home. You know, especially as someone who, you know, you come from multiple countries. How did that question shift in your mind over a course of a year where not only were you not at home, you were in 52 places?
Yeah, I think it got more complicated. Yeah, it's always been, you know, like I moved around my whole life, like every 4 years or so, and never really had a good concept of home besides where I am at the time. And I think it's a question that I think is even harder to answer than it was before I left on this trip. But I think it's that, you know, because I've never had that attachment to home, I've never been back to the house that I grew up in or whatever. I'm more open to like treating a place like it's home, even if I'm only there for 5 days. And I think that really opened up experiences to me. I mean, like as an example, I spent my birthday on Orcas Island in Washington State, and I was kind of dreading it. Like, talk about loneliness. I was like, I'm gonna spend my birthday alone, like on this farm in the middle of nowhere. And I had been talking to the family who ran the farm that I was staying at. I kind of mentioned offhand, like, oh yeah, it's my birthday in a couple of days. And what they did is they killed one of their ducks and like made this huge feast for me. And I just like had lunch with this family, 3 generations, including like a 104-year-old grandmother who lives on the farm. And in that moment, when I was like preparing dinner and like I plucked the duck myself, I'm proud to say. When we're like sitting there having this feast, I was like, this is home today. You know, this is the closest I've had to home all year. So I think it's always been an amorphous concept, and I think it's still one. If it's probably even more amorphous now. But I think the lesson from that is that it comes down to the people, right? It's like people that you make connections with. It can make a place feel like home even for a single evening.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Very inspiring. All that hard work, 1 article per week to the New York Times. Yeah. Sebastian, just one question or maybe two is first, how did you ever do travel writing before? And what was the writing process like? Did you carry a little journal with you and submitting and how much did they edit, etc.? Yeah,
so I did do some travel writing before. I was at Condé Nast Traveler for about 3 years. First as an editor and then a staff writer. And then I got laid off. Welcome to media, if anyone's interested. So, which should be, it should be encouraging though. I got laid off. 3 months later, I got, the job of my dreams. So yeah, I had done some travel writing there, although it was a little different because it was more magazines, so it was more long lead times, and you could really take your time with articles and really massage them into shape, while this was very, very fast-paced. In terms of the writing process, I think it varied from place to place. I didn't really have like a template in my head. I did take notes. I also would, once I got permission from the person I was talking to, obviously, but I would like record almost every conversation that I had. And so I'd have stuff to go back to. I didn't probably take as many like physical notes as you might think, but that was partially because I was doing so much multimedia. When I saw something nice, it was like, compose, take a nice photo with my camera, take out my phone, get a horizontal video of it, get a vertical shot of it for Instagram. It was just like this mental checklist in my head. So by the end of it, I just had this huge library of photos that like was basically documenting every moment of my reporting. So that became very useful, looking back to those to like when I was finally writing. And I never once wrote a piece while I was still in the place. I always wrote it basically in my first day in the next place. And I think that was helpful too, because even just the flight over to the next place gave me the time I needed to like digest and sort of organize in my head what the story could be about. And then I just got very quick. I got very quick at writing. I surprised myself, honestly. And I think it's just muscle memory, and working that muscle over and over again for a year really turns you into a quick writer. I mean, I think by the end of the year, I could write 2,000, I could file a piece in like 2 hours or 3 hours. So it just became really like muscle memory.
Okay, we have time for one last question, I think.
One of your clips was in Hong Kong and people were wearing anonymous masks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe what was going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I was there in October. It was right in the middle of these protests that have been going on in Hong Kong against the Chinese government. And it was at its height, and that was Halloween night actually that I went. And a few weeks before that, the government had announced this face mask ban on protesters because the police can use facial recognition technology to find out who's at the protests, and so this Halloween protest was especially big because people were like, well, you can't make us not wear masks on Halloween, right? So everyone was out in masks, anonymous masks, masks of Xi Jinping, from the leader of China, like tons of masks. And there was one place that got canceled, as you might have read. I was supposed to go to Iran. Unfortunately, even if it was safe, they just weren't willing to give me a journalist visa. So I couldn't go, so we had to cancel that. But I did go to Hong Kong despite what was happening at the time, and it was a real eye-opener. I lived in Hong Kong for 3 years as a kid. I've been many times. It has a very special place in my heart. So it was kind of wild to see it in the middle of this huge upheaval. And, it was my first time being tear-gassed, but it sounds so silly to say because I was with these protesters like 19, 20 years old who were going out every single night and just getting tear gassed every single night. It was one of the more intense stops on the trip. And so what you were seeing was right in the middle of one of the big Halloween night protests in that video.
All right. Thank you again, Sebastian. Really appreciate you coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. I believe there's still some food over there.
Yeah, and I'm also pretty active on Instagram and Twitter and stuff, so if you have questions, feel free to hit me up there.
Sebastian.
Yes.